Okay. All right. We'll invite Tom now and we'll get it going. Gary, good to have you on. All right. Okay. There we go.
Oh, there it is. Can you hear me?
There we go. Just got to hit Gary for whatever reason. Okay. Gary, I can't bring you on camera, but you should hopefully be able to watch. Send me a message. Hopefully you should be able to see it like Jalendo is able to and everybody else. Hoping that's the case. But yeah, you're watching. Okay. All right. So here we go. We're going to take off. We're going to start this. Thank you for those who are joining. I'd like to welcome Tom Sotis of AMOK. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here, Dean. Thanks for asking me. And thank you to all you
Oh my
guys
gosh.
joining in.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get some more and all that. We definitely sent out enough notice. So, before we jump into your intro, one of the things I constantly share with people about you is, not just, genius of methodology, but how you really, really recognize, your students that work hard. You give them recognition, all that. And I think that's something special. In addition, it's such a cohesive group. Like when I have a seminar, the AMOK support is probably out of any other group, I would easily say is by far the most. So whatever you're doing, it's working.
It's just guys that share similar values is what it is. And again, because
Yeah,
we don't have
yeah,
rank and title in favor of the intrinsic reward, we tend to draw those guys that are satisfied enough with skill and brotherhood. And of course, brotherhood is a verb. So when it comes to supporting each other and our events, that's why you can count on us.
right. So I guess, all right, let's jump into the intro there. So I'm going to let you just kind of go with it, what you want to share with us as far as your background.
I've been training for 50 years. I still block with my face really well. Uh, that seems like even 50 years hasn't solved that problem, but I guess that's a product of from training with guys who know how to strike. So
Yeah, which is a good.
over the years, I've gotten pretty highly ranked in several different martial arts, but frankly, I've never trained in a martial art for the sense of rank or title or for a martial art. I've only ever trained in different martial arts so I could improve my street fighting.
So even then, when did what age did that mentality start? When you started thinking like that?
Oh, right away. That
Oh, okay,
my
okay.
older brother joined because he was getting bullied at school, and I was always the kind of kid who would stand up to any bully anyway. So I thought, wow, this is a place that teaches me how to hit back really well. And
Fantastic. Yeah.
so
So then, so as far as your high ranking and all that, once you got, when did you start? I guess from when you started getting rank and all that, was that soon thereafter you started doing seminars, or where there's a gap in time?
yeah, well, there was a gap because I had gotten rank early on, and that wasn't really all that important to me. And I was teaching at the school that I had earned rank at, in the Kenpo school. I had been studying with Nick Serio. Early on, I had studied with George Basmajian until he got killed. But I
Oh,
trained with Nick for many years, and eventually I had left him and I had stayed with Gene Kutu, and I kept that up. But I had long since left that because in the early '80s I went to Los Angeles, and that's where I had a job where I was training retail store detectives and the gang warfare sections of LA how to arrest thieves and shoplifters and robbers and so forth. So I was getting.
how did that come about? Because so you always lived in Rhode Island, correct?
Yes, yes.
So how did that come about where you went all the way across the country? What?
I helped a Vietnamese family settle in America, And when they came to Rhode Island, they didn't like the cold, and they really wanted to be in Southern California, where there were a lot of other Vietnamese people in Orange County. So I moved out there with them to help them settle, and that's how I ended up on the West Coast for a couple of years.
Okay.
So
Okay.
during that time, that's when I had that job, and so I was probably getting in an average of maybe 2 or 3 fights a day for about that whole time. And then at night and on the weekends, we were bounty hunting. So it was a real active period for me to really explore what was going on with street fighting, and I learned a lot of important lessons there.
What now? Just generally, just a general time frame and age.
Yeah, I was probably 21 years old at that time because I was born in 1959. So
So at 21 is when you kind of went out there, and not in addition to helping with security, in conjunction with that, you also sought out bounty hunting.
yeah, well, I was working for a woman who was a private investigator who had a criminal investigation firm, and so she did a lot of different things. And I started off as a store detective, but right away I became a field supervisor, and then I was the chief investigator in a short time as well. And so I participated in a lot of investigations, as well as then the fugitive recovery end of it that we had going on too. So there was a lot going on all at one time. It was a very, very active place. We worked 16, 18-hour days, 7 days a week.
I'm just thinking at 21 years old. At 21 years old, I think I was wandering around Western Connecticut University campus, and you're out there in the jungle.
Well, it was awesome because I was really, at the time, Nick Serio came out to the West Coast to study with Fumio Demura, and I used to pick him up and drive him to his lessons every day. And so he goes, "Hey, why don't I test you for your belt while you're out here, and you can open a school?" And I said, "No, thanks." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I'd have to give up street fighting for dojo fighting, and I don't want to do that." And
And you weren't doing
he was
that.
cool about it though. He nodded. He goes, "Yeah, okay, I get it, no problem." So.
Yeah, yeah. How interesting. Wow.
But
So
that's where
then,
I really learned that. And when there's no rules, weapons rule, and that was the thing that made me really much further want to get into weapons.
so generally speaking, based on the experiences of your fighting
Yeah,
via the retail, and then at night with the bounty hunting,
yeah, yeah. Because
I can only imagine some of the stuff you've seen.
yeah, it was
Wow.
it was outrageous. I had a really good time, and Southern California is dangerous now, but at that time in that area, it was a really wild time. So it was a good
Oh
time in
my
history to be
gosh.
there. I really enjoyed a lot of it. I wouldn't have traded it for anything.
So talk about literally hands-on experience, huh?
Yeah, well, that's the other reason. That's why I really wanted to learn a lot more about weapons, because not only was I facing them, but as soon as you start to realize, look, when it gets out there, I don't care what you know. At the time I weighed 160 pounds. So
Okay.
I wasn't too big, and even though I was lifting a lot and running, and I was in great shape. There's a lot of guys that are huge, or there's multiple opponents, or you're facing other weapons. And look, if you want to
Mm,
survive on the street, you better be able to fight with weapons, or you're not gonna last very long. That's just the simple truth of it.
yeah, and like you said, just the multi-attack factor too. You know what I mean? Just so then, okay, so that's we're kind of in the early '80s now, and then obviously you're getting the street experience and what have you. You're realizing that weapons, the training has to be complete. It has to be even just looked into. Um, when did you return from there? When did you return to Rhode
Yeah,
Island?
after a couple of years of that, I did return to Rhode Island, and for a while, for about 10 years after that, I had the Metro Criminal Investigations. And so I was doing that for 10 more years. But during that time, I went to Rhode Island College, and I was still studying there for a while. And that's also then when I started teaching, when I formulated analytical combat, which at the time was the name I put to the method that I was using to get better at street fighting and to teach others how to fight better on the street.
So was this a precursor to um, any of the knife systems?
Yes, absolutely. Because it was during
Ah,
that
okay.
time also that I was studying Kun Tao with my uncle Frank. Um, Yeah, this guy, he's like an incredible hidden gem of martial arts. Very few people have ever heard of him unless you're involved in judo. But in 1963, he won the blood sport, the Shiai, the full contact Shiai in Taiwan. And it turns out that he's my uncle and didn't live too far from me. So as soon as I got my head
That's
out of my
incredible.
ass and realized who he was, I was very fortunate to be able to study with him. And
Hey, I might want to go train with
and
him.
I would tell you right off that I considered myself a poor student. So uh, I did my very best.
Due to the
When I say poor student, it means that I
tradition.
didn't study with him directly for 15 or 20 years. But I,
Oh, you didn't take advantage of the
but
opportunity.
well, the thing is, I trained with him enough that he gave me permission to teach Kun Tao, and that's another
Okay.
thing that I had started doing at the time because I wanted to get further into weapons, and that's when my uncle Frank said, "Hey, listen, you should probably want to investigate different Filipino martial arts and go investigate them
Ah,
and find out the ones that you think that are going to be right for you and check those out." And that's when I started looking further into FMA. Now, back in
okay.
May of 1981, Gahe was on the cover of Kung Fu magazine holding blades. And I remember thinking, wow, that looks pretty badass, learning blade work. And I didn't even realize
Mm.
early on that Filipinos had entire systems of blade work. Um, and at that time, early on, there was only a few guys teaching knife. Like Kelly Warden was teaching knife, Bob Casper a little bit. James Keating had his Riddle of Steel going on. So there were a few guys teaching knife, but they were like in little pockets. Nobody was doing it like openly, big seminars,
When you
putting it
say
out.
so, when you say teaching knife, like they're teaching it as far as a separate module, and not like in an umbrella of Kali per
Well,
se.
that's number one, is most of what was, but not always, because, I wasn't familiar with their curriculums. Now, James Keating was teaching the Bowie, and that was knife work. It wasn't FMA. I don't know, what other portions, he might have added to that. So I can't really speak to their curriculums.
Okay.
But what I'm
Okay.
saying is
Okay.
that it's not like, put it this way, if you wanted to learn knife work and say, I wanted to learn systems so I could become an instructor and teach knife work, where would you go? And so, right. So in order
Especially
to do
then.
that, if you didn't really have a Filipino instructor who was willing to share that with you, and then what I found out was, well, yeah, Filipino martial arts is being shared and a little bit of knife work, but most of the real systems are kept to the families behind the rattan curtain, so to speak.
Huh. Interesting.
And
Okay. And
so,
this is huh.
yeah, because you couldn't just knock on the door and say, hey, guys, I just want to learn the knife work. I'm not interested in the stick. That wasn't going to
Yeah.
happen.
Right. Yeah.
If you didn't go through all of that stick
No.
work, you weren't going to get whatever knife work they might have kept close to the
Ah,
vest. So,
right. And again, wow. Interesting. Interesting that right. They were kind of regarded. Huh.
so
So then,
at the time, I saw Greg Allen had some videotapes out, and I saw him doing some knife work. So I contacted him and I said, hey, if I come to New York, can I learn just the knife work without doing the stick? And he said, sure. And then I said, if I ask questions, will you answer them? He's like, sure, if I know the answer. And if not, we'll look for them. So I was,
oh my
because some guys
gosh.
are like, well, you can't ask me that. And you know what I mean? You know how that goes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
went down there to work with Greg, and he turned out to be absolutely wonderful. He was so generous and shared his knife work with me. And then when we did knife work, he was like all over me. And I'm like, how are you doing that? That's not the knife work you showed me. He goes, yeah, well, that's the stick work that gets mixed in. But you said you didn't want that, so that's okay. And then I'm like, oh, yeah,
Oh.
why don't we try that stick thing a little bit? And then he just laughed. And that's what brought me further into doing some of the stick work. But when I went to see Greg, the point of going to him was because I wanted to build a bridge so I could go to the Philippines and meet some people and learn some knife work.
Oh, so that was the original. Okay, I didn't know. I mean, I of course knew that you had an affiliation with Greg. However, I didn't know that your goal was to eventually, get to the
And I
Philippines.
and I
Okay.
and I told him
Okay.
that when I went to him. I said, look, I don't want to be rude. I said, because I definitely want to learn with you. I said, but one of the reasons that I chose you is because, I know that you have studied with some of the guys in the Philippines and still have contacts there. And so I would like to go there and study someday. And I'm hoping that maybe you could give me a letter of introduction and I might study well enough so I'm not asking really ridiculous and stupid questions when I get there. But it turned out that in the end, Greg and I, we did that together. We went to study over there. We went and brought my guys over, and we started doing that. And that was Greg who helped
What
us
year?
build the bridge. The first time we went was in 1996. That was after I came back from Russia, though.
Oh, you went to Russia previous to going there?
Yes. Yeah, because I went to Russia in 94.
Okay.
Yeah, I was the fourth American to go deep inside of Russia after the wall came down.
Wow.
So
how did that transpire? How'd that come about?
Well, at the time I was studying firewalking with John Ebert, which is something we can circle back to another time. And that was a really cool experience. And he introduced me to his breathing teacher, Dan Brule, who is today considered the world's foremost expert in breathing. He wrote that book, Breath Mastery. He teaches all over the world.
Oh.
So when I met Dan, he had just come back from Russia. Ahead of him were 2 Jehovah's Witnesses. Dan was the third person to go deep inside of Russia. And when he came back, that's when I met him through John. And so he suggested, I said, well, what's martial arts like there? He goes, I don't know. And I said, well, I'd like to find out. I'd like to go do a research. And he goes, well, why don't you go there? And I said, well, how would I go? I don't know anybody. I don't have any contacts. And so he said, He said, give me your resume and I'll send it to a girl I know. And he goes, and she'll circulate it. So I gave him my resume and he sent it to a girl that he knows. And a few weeks later, I bought a plane ticket and I got on the plane and I just went. And I had no idea what to expect or who to meet. I didn't know anything. I just got off the plane and stood on the tarmac with the bag in my hand going, okay, what now?
So when you get there, I mean, obviously you're not just talking about like a different country at that time. You're talking about a country where we're not even allowed to go. So what was that initial experience like before whatever people you met or were intending to meet?
Well, first off, by that time, we were allowed to go. But before that, that was the Iron Curtain. There was no going, there was no going to Russia. So, I mean, growing up during the Cold War and all of that, I have to admit it was a bit intimidating to think, okay, I'm 10,000 miles from home alone behind the Iron Curtain. So it was an interesting experience for my first time ever really traveling anywhere.
And you were this time 30s?
Yeah, I was about 30.
Okay.
30,
Still,
31 or 2.
So who was so you get off, you're getting acclimated, your people there, picking you up, obviously taking you where you need to go. Who was the first group that you met there?
Well, what happened was I had no idea what to expect. I just got off the plane, was holding my bag, standing on the tarmac, and I thought, well, okay, I'll just walk into the city and I'll see if I can find a place to stay. And if not, I had brought a little space blanket. I thought I might even have to camp in a doorway until I figure things out because I had it was not like there was hotels there or anything. I mean, you're in the middle of, in the country, in the middle of nowhere. So like I was completely unprepared. And then this guy walks up to me. He's like, are you Tom Sotis? And I'm like, well, yeah. And I'm like, who are you? And he said, oh, my name is Abbas Galiyamov, and I've been assigned to be your interpreter. And I was like, assigned by who? He said, oh, the Ministry of Internal Affairs called the president of our college, and and I'm in the English-speaking class, so they sent me down here. And I was like,
wow.
And I said, well, how did anyone know that I was coming? And he laughed. He said, everyone knows you are coming.
Everybody, you're the fourth person coming in. You better believe everybody knows.
So, all of that zoomed right over my head. I was new at all of this. And so in the end, it'd
be overwhelming.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. So in the end, I met 6 different guys and I had to select one of them to be my host, so that he would give me a place to stay and all of that. And the guy that I selected, he he ran a private security company with hundreds and hundreds of guys that worked for him. And he was in league with the government fighting against organized crime at the time for control in the city. So he decided to be my host so that I would train him and his guys. And on the third day, the Minister of Internal Affairs showed up with the TV crew and interviewed me and said that the Spetsnaz wanted to challenge what I do. They wanted to test it and asked me if I was willing to go to the Spetsnaz compound and to test what I was doing. And so I said, well, sure, of course I'll go. And so the next day, my interpreter came with me and I went. And also that guy, Dan Brule, showed up that day. And, you know, he's like, I got to say right off the bat that, you know, when that morning, when Dan's like, so, hey, how you doing? And what's going on today? I said, well, we're going out to the Spetsnaz compound. And he goes, oh, great. And I'm like, oh, Dan, you don't want to come. He's like, why? I said, because there's a pretty good chance we might not be coming back at all. And you know what he said to me? He goes, and you think that I would abandon another American who could potentially be in danger overseas? He goes, not in 100 years.
Oh, that's
he goes,
awesome.
not in 100 years. And he goes and he sits in the chief's car and says, I'm going with you. And here's a guy, he's just a breathing guy, right? You know.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, right. So he was awesome. But what's cool about that is I had an American who was there who witnessed all of what happened that day.
Oh, so so it's kind of nobody's word against there, and things get misconstrued. And
well, it's just that
it's
just that if I say that this happened, somebody might say, "Well, how do you know?" Well, then it turns out that they interviewed me and put me in the newspaper, and then they asked me to stay and train them. So I did that a lot, and so I have a lot of videos and pictures because I trained those guys a lot. I went back and forth for a couple of years. I was the first American private contractor to work in Russia.
That's phenomenal. So okay, so you're going there. So what were they like, the Spetsnaz? Is that I'm pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, Spetsnaz. Look, the Russian people were awesome.
Okay,
they were awesome. The people there were terrific. People who had nothing would give you the shirt off their back. Just the people.
Wow.
The people were absolutely wonderful. You know, and I wasn't.
So when you went there, whatever room or setting you went into, there wasn't any negative vibe or like, who's this guy? Or, I mean, they were pretty welcoming right from the get-go?
Yeah, most everybody was curious and or welcoming.
Fantastic. Wow.
Yeah, it was awesome. You know, because
so then what'd you guys do? I mean, what was the plan?
When we were there? Oh, I trained them, and I trained them in a number of different things. I went back and forth for a couple of years, and then when I came back, that's when I then started. I got back with Greg, and we wanted to go to the Philippines, and that's when I started going to the Philippines regularly. And so I wasn't going back to Russia quite as much at that time. I took a few years off from that. So I was really.
So just as far as timeline is concerned, 94. Okay, you go to Russia. Your first time there. You know, everything goes well. You work with their team there and what have you. And then from that point on, 96 is when you're saying you started going to the Philippines?
Yes. Yeah, the first time we went was like in April, I think, of 96 was the first time we went. Because we went to the World Kali tournament. I wanted to go and see the tournament. And because I heard a lot of the grandmasters come for the tournament and this and that. So, and that's when, by the way, the first time I met Dave Gould, who turned out to be the gem of Filipino martial arts for me in terms of where I ultimately ended up training. Dave Gould.
Who's he?
Who's he? Yeah, right. Don't you get twinges of pain just hearing his name? So.
You mean that man has hit me 2,000 times probably?
Right. So that's the first time I met Dave, when we all went to the Philippines. Greg and we all met up in LA, and then we flew out to the Philippines, and we did a camp out there. We went to the World Kali tournament together, and it's great because I still have all the old videos from back then, and Guru Dave. And I remember watching Guru Dave training with the Grand Poobah, and I said to him later, "Why are you here?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You're better than everybody on this field." You know, I said, you're clearly light years ahead of everybody in this camp. And he just smiled. He goes, "Well, look, I'm here to learn anyway," which was totally cool. So that
So the camp, I'm sorry,
it's all right.
just backing up just a bit. The camp. So was the camp a Bikini Tertia camp?
Well, we went to train with Nene Tortel at the time, who was also Pikiti Tersha, but he and Leo, they ended up having a split. But at that time, Greg and I went to study with Nene because Leo hadn't been around. For 8 years, he hadn't really taught anywhere. Nobody really knew where he was. He was, I guess they had said, well, nobody's seen him for years. So we went to study with
Oh,
Nene.
okay.
And then that day, we trained with Nene. We went to the World Collie tournament, and then Leo showed up at the World Collie tournament.
Okay.
And
Okay.
at that time, I had given a few bucks to the announcer, and so that he called our name. So I got to go out and do a demo. When all the grandmasters did theirs, I got to do ours. And Leo kind of liked our demo, and he ended up coming back to that camp and wanting to stay and train us. And that's how I ended up, working with Leo, training with him for a while. But let me say right out, even though we worked with Leo, it was only with his knife work. I never had anything to do with Pikiti Tersha. I never wanted anything to do with that. And there's probably a bunch of great guys doing a lot of really good work. But if they all go, well, he's not ranked, I would say, yes, I'm not. I completely, I don't want anyone confusing and saying that I'm a Pikiti guy, because I'm not. And so I don't want anyone,
No, no,
I don't
yeah.
want anyone to be offended in the wrong way. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And everybody that understands you and AMOK definitely knows that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we went for the experience, for the guys to be able to go to the old country and meet some of the guys and train there and have the training experience, and that's what it was for. And I got to tell you,
Right.
Nene Tortel is one of the most wonderful human beings you'll ever meet. So
I've heard nothing but fantastic
he,
things
he's
about
just
him.
absolutely totally cool.
Yeah.
He made the entire episodes and adventures worth going. Definitely a cool guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard nothing but wonderful things about him. Yeah, just very giving, very kind, just personable, everything. So just when you're at this camp, I understand, you're going there and all that. So you're with Alond and all that. Like what was the duration you were there for the first time?
I think it was 10 days.
10
I think
days. Okay,
so. I
wow.
think it was total 10 days. But the days were
And
long,
then,
We would train with footwork from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. And then we would come
what
back
is it
and
with him and the footwork? Everybody you talk to in Bikini Tertia, it's like, yeah, and we had to do footwork for 2 hours.
every day.
But
And they would
I'm
tag team
telling
us.
you,
So, it was 5 a.m. to
yeah,
10
wow,
p.m. every day. By the time we break a little for breakfast, an hour for lunch, an hour for dinner, and lectures and everything else. So they were long, long days, you know.
I
And
bet. My
I
gosh.
remember getting up in the morning, and it was so funny because Dave Gould goes, "You can always tell when you're at training camp. The hallway smells like Ben Gay in the morning."
Oh, my gosh.
So,
When you meet, you talk to Dave and all that, from that point on, did you kind of, hang out with him, get to know him better and so forth?
yeah, certainly I started connecting with Guru Dave because I could really tell that he's the man. He knew exactly what he was doing. I could see in
Hmm.
him that's what I had gone to the Philippines for. It was funny that I had to go to the Philippines with an
You
American
had to go
to see
back.
it,
It was right in your own
Yeah,
country.
certainly. And that's when, when we got back into the States, I started, I went out to visit Guru Dave and started to train with him as well. And he set us on the path, if you're not beginning with true attack, all the learning that follows is somehow skewed or false. And that ultimate truth became the guiding light, I should say, of AMOK's development, because AMOK has its own
Yeah.
methodology. Because I never studied the Lamako enough with Guru Dave. We brought him in to do a bunch of seminars. Uh, I've always considered
Right.
Guru Dave my superior and my teacher when it comes to weaponry. Absolutely. And that
No, no, you've
and
always
it's
given
20 years
credit.
later, and I still feel the same way.
Yeah, no, you've always, everybody knows you hold them in high esteem without question. Yeah, yeah. So then, I guess before we jump in AMOK, there was a system you had before AMOK. Can we, I guess, when did that start? Because I know Dave obviously had influence, but did he have influence in the first system you created before it turned into AMOK?
Well, as I said earlier, I had the analytical combat, which was empty hands. Once I started wanting to learn knife work, I was going to seminars and getting videotapes, and I was trying to find in books, I was trying to find every possible source of how I could learn, you know, and because I wanted to fashion our own knife work, and I was going to kind of blend that with the four themes as I was doing at the time with analytical combat. And I was trying to make a street-worthy knife work. Um, and that's when I started then at the time, I said, well, why don't we formed what I called the International Blade Fighters Guild. And that
Okay.
was dedicated to researching different knife systems to see, what I wanted was so that when somebody else who had the thirst to learn knife the way I did, they would have a place where they could go and go, well, who are the different systems and who's teaching it and how could I contact them and who's doing this? And
Sure.
so, you know, the different guys that were doing knife at that time started coming together, and we had a forum that was going, and guys were writing in on the forum, and it was starting to really take shape in that form. So I was happy with it initially. Uh, but like anything else, it didn't have a structure. Martial politics become an issue. Who's valid and who
Yeah.
isn't, who's this and who's that. And then people used to say to me, well, if that's the guild, what's the name of your knife work?
Ah.
So there became confusion as to what was the guild, what was my knife work, what was the differences between them. And that's when I said, well, okay, I'm going to formulate my own knife work, that methodology, and I'm going to call that AMOK. And that might be one of the methods that's available under the guild, along with Guru Dave's or Greg's or anyone else's that we were doing at the time. But in the end,
Okay.
but in
Okay.
the end, that became an organizational thing, and I really didn't want to be involved in organizations or politics in any way. And so ultimately, I
Hmm.
just let that sit back on the back shelf, and I just concentrated on developing AMOK. And that's when things started. Tim Gillette in Fall River, in Tiverton, Rhode Island, he hosted my very first seminar ever. We're still close friends to this day.
Really?
Great guy, Tim Gillette. He's got all of the right
Yeah.
values and so forth. Loads of respect for Tim.
Yeah, he's on here right now.
Oh, is
So
he?
kudos
Oh,
to
right
Tim
on.
Gillette.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
So yeah, Tim hosted
You
my
know.
first seminar, and that's what kicked it off. And
Oh,
you know,
fantastic.
over the years, I've done over 1,000 seminars in 24 countries.
1,000?
Over, yeah,
Wow.
over
Wow.
over 1,000 for sure.
Oh, that's incredible, Tom. Fantastic. Wow.
Well,
Good
it's
on
the only
you.
thing I've
That's
done. I taught knife full time since '94, doing only seminars. You know, of course, I have my Sunday
so when
class a couple of times, twice a month, and I've taught privately, but I've never had like a school. I've only ever operated through
right.
seminars.
You're right. I knew you never had school. So when at what year, just far as time frame is concerned, at what year did you kind of go from the guild and you went head on forward with AMOK?
I'd have to say it was probably right around 2000. I'd
So
have to look up. That's an
around there,
interesting question that I don't know the exact date for, but
yeah,
I'd
but
have
I
to look it
mean
back.
that's
But it's right around then.
okay. So when you and Tim around that time is when he kind of hosted you, correct?
No, Tim hosted me in '94. That was because
Oh,
in
94.
'94 was the first time I'd shown any knife work publicly. In fact, there was a
Oh,
big martial arts expo in Boston, and I rented a booth. And Greg Allen came up from New York, and I put the guild information out. And every hour on the hour, Greg and I did a demonstration in the booth. And it was so
okay.
popular that people stood around on chairs to see it. The people from the convention center came and asked me if I'd be willing to give a seminar on how to run a booth. So
Oh,
the knife work
fantastic.
was really popular. So that was our first public debut with that, and it was very encouraging. And
Hey, is that where Jesse? Is that where Jesse met you?
no, I met him just shortly after that. Just shortly after
Oh,
that.
right, but it
Yeah.
was another convention
Yeah.
though, correct?
Well, yeah, because Jesse and I just had the 20th anniversary down at his school. So, so
Okay,
yeah, it had to
okay,
be,
okay,
yeah, it had to be right around then though. No, because that was
okay. Because
still
I remember him.
94, and then Jesse didn't come on until right around 2000, I think.
Don't even bring it up because I remember him when I met him. He was telling me how he met you because he was up there. I think affiliation with Valari's, I believe, and how he met you, seeing
Yeah,
you there.
yeah, but it wasn't through
I
that. That was when I met Randy Hodges, who was with them. And Randy ended up becoming an
okay.
AMOK instructor, and he's the one who moved to Thailand, and he settled AMOK into Thailand, and he's the one who makes, and Randy's the one who makes
Oh,
the NOC trainers.
oh, oh, wow. You know what? I mean, I know he made some knock trainers and all that, but I had no idea that you guys. Oh, that's interesting. I had no idea that you guys met there, and then he eventually moved over there.
Yeah, yeah. No, in
Oh,
fact, he walked up to me at that event and he goes, "Hi, my name's Randall Hodges, and you don't know me, but you're gonna because I'm never gonna leave you alone until I learn this." And so we became buddies, and he came over my house and trained twice a week for years. And we traveled a lot. He came to probably 10 or 12 different countries with me, and we went around the world.
oh,
And
wow.
on one of the trips, he said, "I'm not going home." So,
So he's been around the whole evolution. I mean, he's been like for the whole
yeah,
evolution.
Randy was one of, I would say,
Wow.
when I say he was one of the founding members, I say that because he's one of the people, he had the first full-time AMOK Academy here in the USA. He had a full-time AMOK Academy when he was in Bangkok too. Randy's full on.
Wow.
But
I didn't, I knew there was definitely a connection with you guys. I didn't realize though it went back that far.
yeah,
Wow. Interesting. So then okay, so then you decided you're going full force with AMOK somewhere circa around 2000. How did you perpetuate it? How did you get the name out there and all that? I mean, I know you obviously by this time you're somewhat known, but now you're kind of going forward with a new kind of not only new name, but maybe not necessarily product being the right word, but how did you go about getting it out there?
well, number one, Doreen Cogliandro from the Revere Karate Academy in Revere, Mass. She hosted a seminar for me. I met her on the same day that I met Randy. And she was very
Okay.
heavily involved in the Kenpo community, and it got me invited to one of their international camps. And I met a whole lot of guys there. And then that instantly brought me to New Zealand and Spain and different states because that Kenpo organization was very wide to Mexico and so forth. There,
Okay.
Ed Parker's organization was quite big. And so,
Yeah, yeah,
so
no,
a lot of those
definitely.
guys from early on, it's how I met Dave Elliott from Hawaii, who's an AMOK instructor and so forth. And
Okay,
so,
okay.
so that's how all of that came about for part of that. So a portion of my work came because that's what started through martial arts, and then a bunch of other arts started to pick it up as well. The other thing that
Okay.
happened was the shooters. There was, a lot of guys that were involved in tactical shooting at the time, Gabe Suarez and from Suarez International and some of the others. So they became more interested in the knife work. And so I started moving a lot through the gunfighters. And as well,
Ah,
before I even went to Russia, I had been training the FBI up at the field office in Boston and working with the prosecutors that put the Boston mob in jail and the others. So I was already working with elements within our government before Russia. And so, of course, after Russia, I had met many more elements within our government. And so I had another track of development that was going on there. And that's happened for the last 20 some odd years as well, too. But, that most of that we fly under the radar with most of that.
yeah, right, for good reason. Okay, so when you went to the other, countries and all that, can you just like what was it like? You're Cambodia, Thailand. I mean, not your most Cambodia. I don't know anybody who's gone there and taught a seminar besides you. Mexico, obviously, South Africa. Um, was it because of the violence there that kind of the people wanted you there, or what was the catch? I guess.
Well, for South Africa, there was a couple that had trained with me in the U.S. for a short time, and then they had moved to South Africa. They were originally from there. And then so when they
Okay,
got
okay.
there, they then asked me to go out and start teaching seminars. And of course, South Africa is an ultra violent place to be. And, you know, AMOK is
Mm,
it's a natural for that country, just absolutely natural. And so, you know, it caught on really well, really big. We did very well for a lot of years. I went back and forth for 10 or 11 years. And at one time, we
wow.
had a very good sized organization there for a while.
Oh, fantastic. So I guess we're gonna get to why the name. Why'd you choose the name Amok?
AMOK is a mentality. It's a mentality of survival. And everybody pretty much, I'm sure, knows the term to run amok, which that is usually means that somebody goes on a suicidal rampage until they're put down. What kind of mentality would it take to survive that? And so that's why I thought, well, we need to have a mentality that's as extreme as that, but with a desire to survive.
Interesting.
Because,
I
you know,
like
the
that.
few times in my life that, you know, when I was in peril and I really, really thought that probably within moments that I'd be dead, I can tell you during those moments, every cell in my body was saying, I want to live. And, you know, I'm
Mm,
very fortunate that I did. And in bringing that out, I know that, you know, facing a blade, you know, your life is at stake. And I know that every cell in my body wants to survive. And so I want to have a mentality of survival that's equal in energy and intensity. Okay, if somebody has that level of commitment to taking your life, you have to have an equal or greater commitment to preserving your life if you expect to survive.
mm.
And so AMOK,
No, right.
AMOK as a training methodology is a reflection of that mentality.
Okay. So the name. Okay. Um, why is? I mean, I know you've done other things in your career and all that, and you've pretty much explored everything. But why is it? Why is a Maka blade-based method?
Well, AMOK is about achieving the best possible outcomes in crappy circumstances, especially violent ones. And so the blade is the only logical place to actually start. All right, and here's why.
Okay.
Here's why. It's what I call the undeniable logic of the blade. When people say, "Oh, I teach self-defense," I go, "Well, great. Against who?" Well, you know, attackers. What
Yeah.
kind?
No.
So in other words, have you
Attack.
really thought it through, or did you just kind of lump
Good
them
point.
together? And so if we look at that, what
Mm,
if we have to ask ourselves if we're involved in, and for me, it's about self-protection on the street, not about gaining belts, which is why we don't have any of that. So
right.
look
Right.
at that. Who are the threats you're likely to face? The average untrained person who is not to be underestimated. Okay. Another trained person, a Goliath, or somebody who's just massively stronger than you, multiple opponents,
Mm,
or you could face a stick, a knife, a pistol, or multiple armed opponents. So there's like 8 different types, categories of threat to civilians. That's why training military is actually easier. Yeah, you better
ah.
know that your stuff is functional, but it's a narrow context. He's attacking you, you got to take him down. You know, it's not like civilians
Right.
where there's a variety of different circumstances that have to be adjustable to. So when you look at
Plus,
that,
with the military, I mean, they know that that this is why they're here.
right,
You know what I mean?
there's
It's
your rules of engagement. Okay, use your knife,
yeah,
put him down, go to the next. So, for civilians, when you look at that spectrum of threats, and what do you have? Empty hands, pistols, sticks, and knives. And to try to condense this, the bottom line is this: when you learn empty hands, it'll help you against the average untrained person, but it's equal against other trained people, and against weapons, you're usually deficient.
mm,
If, on the other hand, you learn firearms, and make no mistake about it, there are some situations in which firearms is the only solution and nothing else will suffice. But that, at the same time,
right.
because firearms offers no escalation of force, it's very difficult to shoot someone just a little. that's only good for, if necessary, but good for a very narrow tactical bandwidth. Up on the other end, when somebody's got a knife or a gun and so forth. But anywhere along the middle, it leaves you still exposed. When you look at stick, though, because you can hit someone a little or you can hit them a lot, and you can use a stick
Correct.
against other sticks and knives in close quarters against pistol and so forth, it gives you a very broad tactical spectrum. And you know what? Knife gives you the very same broad tactical spectrum. So when you compare knife to stick, you go, well, wait a minute. A stick isn't easy to carry. It's not easy to deploy. You need strength to employ it.
No.
Where blades are easy to carry, it's easy to deploy, and it's easy to employ, even if you're sick or injured. So in a practical way, if a person needs to be able to protect themselves, learning to use a knife gives you more tactical coverage in the shortest period of time than anything else. And that platform of movements, you can use those same moves for a stick, close quarters with a pistol, and while you're using the trigger, and with empty hands. So since all of those different categories are not in competition, they're complementary, and I want to be skilled at all of them, knife is the logical place to start, because now, again,
The start. Okay.
now it gives me the platform for learning all of them. And so that's why, looking at it logically, knife is the only place to start for a person who wants to be able to protect themselves and their loved ones in a short time and lay the foundation
That's
for all the other weapons. So
Wow.
some guys
That's,
say, Dean, one mind, all weapons. AMOK embodies that. It's not just lip service where it's implied but not supplied.
and you have to like I enjoyed that. That was just that whole thing, the blade-based method and all that. And obviously being under you, I have, a better understanding, but I think this is really great for the audience to hear, those that maybe are not as knowledgeable, Is AMOK similar to martial arts?
No. AMOK is not a martial art, and it's different in a number of ways. A lot of times people say, well, number one, to the average person, when they ask me, I go, well, look, if you want to learn gunfighting, you're probably going to go to a range, meet some guy named Bob who's in jeans, you shake his hand, you pay him for class, he teaches you how to use a firearm, and you go home. And learning AMOK is similar, where you go to a training session, meet some guy named Bob who's wearing jeans, you pay him for class, you learn to handle your knife, and you go home. You're not going to wear a uniform. There's no rituals involved. There's no belts and all that. So learning to handle a weapon for the purpose of self-protection is completely different than learning a martial art. And I'm not saying there aren't some little overlaps, because you're both doing a little bit of fighting, but there are huge differences. Number one, AMOK is a company. It's not a martial arts organization. And it's set up like a company, and it's run like a company. And the way that we have a licensing program, nobody else in the world has one similar to that. It's the only one that really meets professional standards, meaning that it stands up to external scrutiny in court.
Yeah, I love that aspect.
So it's really important, especially if you're teaching live blades or people are using blades, okay, that at some point, if somebody ends up in court and they're going to say, well, where did you learn? And then they'll put that teacher up there. And if they say, where did you learn? If he says, well, I got my weekend certificate somewhere. Well, you know what? There's a huge liability for all of them, because none of them can show that they really met any professional standards. Because look, if it takes a couple of years to even get a black belt in a McDojo, what makes you think you can learn to handle a knife in a weekend when it's far more complex than that? So in the end, that's one of the things, is that I wanted to establish professional standards, because in the martial arts world, there are no universal standards. They're not recognized in the business world. And I wanted to take a different tack. The other thing is go ahead.
No, I find that aspect so fascinating, that you're going from the premise of a company, their trainers are going to have like licensing. I mean, I just think, like I've told you before, I just think that's phenomenal. Did this just come about like recently? Because I know you've done a lot of dynamic changes, all for the good, of course. Was this always like the plan? always?
It was, but I always had the growing pains. I didn't always know how to get there, and the steps on how we would make that evolution or changes weren't always obvious. So it was difficult growing along the way. We made our biggest changes in 2012 in terms of licensing and all of that, because Andrew Smith is a real professional with business and as a consultant. And he said, well, if you want to do it, here's how to do it right. And so we
Okay.
set it up and we did it right. And
Yeah, I
part
think it's
of that too is liability, because before that, when I personally authorized guys to run a club, and I had clubs all over the world, I was personally carrying the
okay.
liability for all of them because I didn't license them and tell
Ooh,
them they have to get their own. And as you
right,
know,
right.
instructors today are at more risk from the people they train than for whom they train. And I was carrying the liability for 50 groups. So it was important that we did
Wow.
proper licensing and that the guys got their proper insurance where it was required. Not everybody, not every country is, but those that require it
Hmm.
got it. And now everyone's covered. You know, what's the point of learning to protect yourself and then you end up in jail somewhere, or you end up broke or bankrupt by doing that?
Right, right. No, no. I mean, it's no argument here. I think it's phenomenal the way you set that up. It's completely different than anybody for that matter. Um, so then so that's the company, making a distinction, obviously, from, other organizations and all that.
And they're
Um,
run professionally
your
as well.
organizers,
And the same thing, we run with proper business policies and procedures. So you don't get nepotism and you don't get favoritism and you don't get the tyrant business and all the other things that some guys do when they have their little fiefdoms of control.
yeah.
And here's another thing, and that's another thing, is that if you notice, most martial arts organizations are in the shape of a pyramid with the students on the bottom and then instructors and then the masters and Grand Poobah sits at the top. And what happens in almost all of them is that the most powerful personalities rise to the top. And so you have a whole lot of
Mm,
competition in this very limited space for limited rank and recognition, where all the masters are fighting for space. And you know what? Eventually it becomes untenable and it fractures and one of them breaks away and half of the pyramid goes with them and all the politics happen because it's actually designed to, because it tries to hold people in. It's a system that confines people, and eventually it's just going to become untenable and explode. And we see it all the time. So instead, I created a MOX organization to be our like a funnel, where our job as
okay.
trainers and instructors is to help people get up through the bottom of the stem. And then once they get up into the cone, they can study in any different areas they want. And they can study go for as high and as long as they want with no cap on that. And you know what? It's designed for them to spill out so that they can say, well, if I don't want to stay in the funnel, I can spill out and start my own pyramid or funnel, whichever they prefer. Because
Mm,
I want to help people to grow up and grow out of the house without ripping the house out when they go. I don't want to contain
yeah.
people. I want to help them grow. I want to develop people. And so if somebody wants to develop in a different direction, who would I be to try to hold them back? Instead, I'd rather support them. And you know what? Randy Hodges is a perfect example of that. Because when Randy moved to Thailand and he started spending a lot of time, he started teaching AMOK his own way, which you should. And I said to him after a while, you know what, Randy, you should start your own method. And he goes, but I want to be an AMOK. I said, you're going to be stuck being my brother for life, but you should still start your own
Yeah.
method. And so he did. And that's why he has the knock knife fighting. We're still brothers. He's still an AMOK. He still comes to all the camp, but he
Yeah.
has his own knife
Right.
work. And why shouldn't he? And that's why, to me, that's a success story in AMOK, that somebody can grow up, grow out, leave the house, and be successful.
No, that attitude I think is phenomenal. And unfortunately, as you know, in today's martial arts, it's not really prevalent. You know what I
No,
mean? It's
because
a rarity that you know.
Because usually in martial arts, once you become a black belt, you become a commodity. You become somebody that can teach to
Yeah.
someone else and help them earn. And so people have designs on you rather than being
Yeah.
there to support you. The other thing,
No, and
the other thing that
that
we did
whole
different than martial
role.
arts is our means of distribution. almost all of the martial arts will be a group somewhere where you go and you train, and it's a brick and mortar location. And within a certain geographic area, people will drive to go there.
Mm.
Whereas AMOK has always, for the most part, been mobile. Now, Randy, and we do have training groups, but AMOK is mobile. I've always taught it privately, where I would drive to somebody and teach them. And then because we became, martial arts schools became really our target in terms of marketing, which was great because I can see a school, I know who the instructor is, I can go down and talk to him, and if he likes it, then we can get the seminars going. So it was easy for me to identify who my market was and to go get it. And that allowed us to really spread out geographically, because only if people in a limited geographic area want to do knife. And so it allowed us to stay kind of fluid and moving, and we kind of moved through the martial arts circles and through the gun guys just doing that. And if a school closed down, well, it's like a piece of your finger fell off. You didn't lose your whole hand. You get another one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Not the end. Right. No, I always loved that philosophy about you, that there wasn't like indentured servitude. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to grow with me. And man, if you take it a notch further, well, good on you. You know what I mean? Like, I've always admired that about you in the system, you know, because it's not, I tell you, it's not a common theme.
No.
You know, as you know,
well,
it's not a common theme.
I wanted AMOK to provide for others what I could never find anywhere else. And so AMOK really is like a big bullshit sifter that allows you to sift through it. And that's our job, even among ourselves. Greater functionality means always picking away at the BS. And while other guys talk about that, they don't do a very good job of it mostly. And that's how come our methodology is so different than others, that's another thing. Ours is completely reversed of everyone else. And apparently since we're almost at 8 o'clock now, that might be the course of perhaps a second one of these where we could actually discuss methodology and in depth.
And what I want, and we absolutely need to do a part 2, because what I would like to get from you in part 2 is the remaining 5 features. So I think what we could do is, when we do part 2, kind of go over 1 again for those maybe who weren't there, kind of go through the 6, and then absolutely tell a little about the 6, and then jump into the meat and potatoes of, you know, the methodology and what makes AMOK just so unique and different from everybody. I think that I would love to do with you, assuming that you, and it sounds like your game.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Just let me know when, and we can do that again. So.
Yeah, I'd like to, definitely soon, just so there's not a huge gap in time. But so we'll have to look over schedules. But this has been wonderful. I'm looking at some of the comments, you know, from people that, you know, have been watching and all that, and it's been some really, really good stuff. So I think this is a winner.
Well,
thanks to you.
Well, first, Dean, I want to say thank you very much for setting this up, and I really want to thank everybody who showed up to kind of listen in with us and so forth. You know, I really appreciate everybody's participation, and I hope I didn't bore everybody too much with my stories.
No, I'm bored. Oh my God, no. I think that's, if anything, they want more.
Well, next time I'd really like to get into the methods so we can talk about the activities and authenticity and deliberate and the different types of fighting and sparring, and how come practice and training is different than the way most other guys do it, so that they can compare and contrast a little bit for themselves. And
I definitely want to get into
that'd be great. So I'd really look forward to that.
Because that's going to take, I tell you, the whole methodology and the trying, man, that's going to take an hour at least, you know, but a good hour. All right, sir. Again, thank you for, you know, making the time to, you know, come chat. I really enjoyed it, and I think everybody else did as well.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. Take care. I hope we get to train together soon.
And AMOK.
AMOK.
All right, brother. Thank you.
All right, let me.
All right, everybody. Thank you for those who joined. Definitely going to be getting Tom back on. He was fantastic. Big John, AMOK to you, brother. Hey, I got your shirt. Tom is coming to second. So if you want me to give it to Tom, or I can send it to you, really no worries. just send me a PM like what you think you prefer. But I got your double XL AMOK shirt. Yes, absolutely, Marvin. We're definitely gonna do a part two. Right on, Gary. Also, I'm going to be having some more guests on here coming up. I'm going to haven't had a solidified list yet, but I definitely this is something I'd like to continue, particularly in the FMA world. Even though Tom is not FMA, but weapons, you know. So I'll be looking to have my, tentatively speaking, Bong Abonneer of the Abonneer system, Marvin as well, at some point. Just to throw some name, Burton, I'd like to get him. You know, just give you guys some ideas. So, you know, obviously I'm going to make mention of that. Definitely a lot of notice and all that. So I hope to have you guys continue to support because I'll keep going, you know, and all that. So, yes, thank you, Mr. Wong. Yes, definitely Tom is a man. We're definitely going to be doing it. Absolutely, Dan. I would love to cross hands with you. Thank you, John, brother. Again, I'm going to sign out, but I want to thank from my heart, thank you for all that jumped and joined in. I truly, truly appreciate it. And we'll see you next time around. Peace.